We are this evening covering the period from the Passover of 29 AD until the Feast of Tabernacles of the same year, 29 AD. Now, it was during this period of time that Jesus passed the halfway point of his 3.5-year ministry. And we want to note some things concerning that this evening. We have the last Bible study, we covered the time between the Passover of 28 and the Passover of 29. If you remember, Jesus began his public ministry at the fall festival season of 27 AD. That was when he appeared there where John was baptizing by the River Jordan, where Jesus came there, was baptized by John, then within a short period of time left from around that area. He remained there preaching for a short period of time, we're not told exactly how long, left from that area, returned back to Galilee, went to Cana, the wedding feast that is recorded. Then within a short period of time after that, where his first public miracle is recorded, he left, went away into the wilderness by himself, fasted for 40 days, was tempted of Satan, went through this period of time, returned from there, and we pick up the story with his coming there to Jerusalem in the Passover of 28 AD, which was about 6 months after he had been baptized by John. He made a very dramatic appearance in Jerusalem, and to the point that he came in, chased the money changers out of the temple, went through the whole thing. You remember the story. And last Bible study, we focused in on that time period. We picked it up there as he cleansed the temple and then began that period of private teaching of his disciples. Now understand that Jesus had more than 12 disciples. There were 12 of the disciples that were ordained as apostles. We will note that here this evening. A disciple was anyone who followed him. At the time that is recorded in Acts chapter 1, at the end of his public ministry, there were 120 acknowledged followers, 120 disciples or students. Out of that 120, there were 12 that he singled out and ordained as apostles. Now, there were certain ones, including some of the apostles, as well as other disciples. If you remember the story, you remember in Acts 1, after Judas had committed suicide, and Simon Peter and the rest of the 11 were gathered in the upper room, and they said, "We need someone to take Judas's place." And then they said, "Now, it needs to be someone who was with us from the beginning." And so they singled out two individuals recorded there in Acts 1, who they said had been with them from the beginning. In other words, they had been among the disciples. They were not one of the 12. These were not one of the 12, but were disciples, were students, had been there, had seen the things that Jesus had done, had heard firsthand the things that he had done, and in that sense could testify as an eyewitness of the resurrection and of the things that had transpired. So, during this year, the private teaching to his disciples was the Sermon on the Mount, various things that are recorded. We pick up the story this evening around the time of the Passover of 29 AD. And this was about a year and a half after Jesus had begun his public ministry. And we will focus on a 6-month period here of 29 AD. Now, the bulk of this time was Jesus spent his time in the area of Galilee. The Pharisees, and particularly the Sadducees were the priestly group, but the religious establishment was centered in Jerusalem. Now, if you look at a map, you'll find that there are three areas. there that make up what we call the Holy Land. There was, in the southern part, centered around Jerusalem, the province of Judea. North of Judea was the Roman province of Samaria, and north of Samaria was the province of Galilee. Now, these three taken together, plus some territory on the other side of the Jordan River, made up the ancient kingdom of Israel, which, of course, consisted of Judah in the south, later, when they split after Solomon's death, the kingdom of Judah in the south and the kingdom of Israel in the north. Well, Israel was taken into captivity, and then a little over 100 years later, Judah was taken into captivity. Judah, the Jews, were the only ones that ever returned. They came back, and they settled not only in the southern area around Judea, but gradually as time went on, they spread out and settled in some of the other area that had been anciently the territory of Israel. Now, the Samaritans, see, the area of Samaria and Galilee were both parts of what had been the northern tribes, the territory of the northern tribes. The northern tribes were moved out. Babylonians were brought in to take their place and settled there by the king of Assyria. These Babylonians became known as Samaritans, taking their name from Samaria, which was the capital city of ancient Israel. They were a people, we studied them in our Old Testament survey series, and the great antipathy that was present between them and the Jews. The Jews really looked down on and despised the Samaritans. There had been various problems in the past. And then there was north of Samaria an area of Jewish settlement known as Galilee. Now, the Jews in Judea tended to look down on Galilee and on Galileans, because the Jews in Judea were a very exclusivist group. They really looked down on anyone else. In Judea, they did not have a lot of contact with non-Jews. Didn't have to, other than some of the Roman occupation troops and things of this sort. They really had very limited contact. They were able to do so. But in Galilee, it was an area where the population was a little more diverse. It was there were Jewish settlements, Jewish communities predominantly, but there was a significant Gentile settlement in the area. It tended to be more involved in direct trade and commerce. There was a lot more contact. And the Jews in Judea really kind of looked down on the Galileans. They viewed likening the territory of ancient Israel to the temple. They compared Jerusalem to the Holy of Holies, you see, and Judea as being the holy place, and they call Galilee the court of the Gentiles. This is kind of the area on the periphery. So they had a very kind of a disparaging, patronizing attitude toward the Galileans. Now, that's not uncommon, because you can go around the world and you will find that virtually anywhere you go, that whoever is there has someone else they look down upon. That seems to be human nature. People want to look for somebody that they can look down on. And so the Jews, who look down on a number of people, look down on the Jews who live in Galilee, and they look down on the Jews that lived in the diaspora even more, because they were really in contact with the Gentiles. You have to kind of get the picture of it. And realize, you see, when Jesus came in and began to preach, and they said, "Can any good thing come out of Galilee?" That was kind of their attitude. You see, if it's of any value, it must have originated, certainly it originated in Judea and in Jerusalem. How can anything of value, anybody who knows anything, originate from not right here? I mean, obviously, if this guy knew very much, he'd be one of us. How can he be of anything of value? He comes from way up there. We have regional and sectional conflicts in this, in our nation, our society today. Same thing. Human nature is basically the same all the way down. Well, Jesus knew that when He began to spend a lot of time in Jerusalem and in Judea, He was going to come very quickly into real strong conflict with the religious leaders. Because He was going to be right there in their territory. He was going to be on their turf. And it wasn't going to be long before they were going to resent it and how. You see, they did not like, they were jealous of Him because as they viewed it, He comes in and He does these things and says these things, and people are impressed, and people flock to hear Him, and they ignore us. We're going to lose our status. We're going to lose our position. You know, we've got a good thing going. We're the ones that everybody looks to. He comes in here, and people start paying attention to Him, and they acknowledge Him, and they want to listen to Him, and they're impressed with Him, and He performs these miracles, and He preaches these powerful sermons. And we don't like the effect it's having on the people. What's more, we are afraid, you see, that He's going to stir something up, and the Roman government is going to intervene, because He's talking about a kingdom of God, and He's talking about being the Messiah, or people are talking about that and are saying that He is. All we need is something that provokes the Romans, and they send in troops and they smash us, and we're out of a job, and we don't want that. So Jesus knew that when He started spending a lot of time in Jerusalem and in Judea, that a crisis was going to come to a head fairly quickly. The result was that Jesus, a great deal of the time of His ministry, did not stay there in Jerusalem. He would come up there for the holy days, would be there for periods of time, and then He would leave. Just be gone, out of the way, would be up in Galilee, would be in other areas, preaching and teaching. But He was kind of out on the periphery. And, the Jews tended to think that anything of significance had to be going on where they were. It's kind of today, the power centers in our nation are Washington, D.C. and New York City. And people who are part of the Eastern power establishment tend to view anything going on in as they would view it, the backwater areas of the country. Wow, that can't be of any significance, If it was important, it'd be going on right here in Washington, New York. How can something going on in, Lafayette, Louisiana, or, even Pasadena, California? Well, that's, nothing of value can be going on there, because after all, we're the ones who are where the center of power and money and control and everything is. And so people tend to, have that kind of short-sighted outlook. That's true in our time today, and it's true in other times, other societies. It just is the nature of things. Now, during the time we're going to cover this evening, Jesus was going over Galilee, city by city. Now, Galilee, for all of its being looked down upon, was really the richest area of Palestine, richest part of Palestine. Which, of course, was in the time of Christ divided into Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. Alfred Edersheim, in his classic work, The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah, quotes various ancient sources to prove that Galilee had upwards of 240 cities and towns of 15,000 inhabitants or more. Josephus points out that it was a rich area, that it teemed with agriculture. There was a lot of it was the climate was described as being the best in Palestine, and there were great forests in that area at that time, dissimilar to what it is today. Originally, the whole land was a land flowing with milk and honey. As a result of misuse as a result of God's removal of His blessings, various problems came in, and of course, we've seen parallels even in more modern times as an area is denuded of its forests, the patterns of rainfall change, the climate tends to change, various problems had come in. So it was things have changed since then, but at that time Galilee was really the richest area agriculturally of Palestine. The Sea of Galilee, of course, was there, which was famous for its abundance of fish. The entire area was a rather prosperous commercial area. Caravan routes came through there. It was an area that was in a lot of contact with the Gentiles. Now, this is where Christ grew up, this area. It is also the area where He spent a great deal of His public ministry. Now, during the time period we're covering this evening, shortly after the days of unleavened bread in 29 AD, the 12 were selected from among Christ's disciples and ordained. Now, we ought to take note a little bit of the disciple or of the apostles and who they were. Sometimes if you see the movie, or seen some of the movies, you know, they really don't give a very accurate view. It shows one of the accounts we read this evening of Christ walking by and seeing Peter and Andrew there, and He told them, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Now, as that kind of thing is introduced in the movie, you see Him coming by and He kind of lays eyes on these guys and He transfixes them with a stare, and it's almost as though there's a hypnotic effect, and they kind of drop what they're doing and they follow off. Well, it wasn't that way. Peter and Andrew, he had known for a period of time. Andrew and Peter both, but Andrew particularly, had been a disciple of John the Baptist. Were there when Jesus was baptized. John had pointed out Jesus to his disciples. Peter and Andrew followed him, or Andrew particularly at that time followed him, because John had pointed him out. Plus, Peter and Andrew, who were brothers, were in a fishing partnership with James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Well, James and John were the sons of Zebedee, and their mother's name was Salome. Salome was a sister to Mary, the mother of Jesus. So that meant that James and John were first cousins to Jesus Christ. They had known about Him from the time of early childhood. They did not grow up in the same town, so exactly how much contact they had, but undoubtedly they had some, particularly at festival times, as they would tend to travel together to Jerusalem to the feast and things of that sort. So they certainly knew who He was. And there was a contact there. They had, on occasion, they had spent time with Him. They had listened to Him. They had been with Him. By the time that He told Peter, come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men, by that time, Peter and Andrew had been with Him on a number of occasions, had heard Him preach, had probably been there at Cana of Galilee and seen the turning of the water into wine. They had heard the Sermon on the Mount. They had been with Him from time to time at various occasions. They were in business for themselves, and they would be gone for periods of time there, spending time when He was in the locale, and they were students, they were disciples, but they had not they had not turned their back on their business. And so at this point, Jesus told them, look, I have something in store for you that goes beyond what you're doing. You need to leave that and come follow me full time. And by that time, they knew enough and were convinced enough that they were prepared to do so. We read also of Philip, who was a native of Bethsaida. He was a friend of James and John and Peter and Andrew, and he was also a disciple of John the Baptist. Bartholomew, who was also known as Nathaniel, Bartholomew is really a surname. Bar in Hebrew or in Aramaic is virtually the equivalent of Hebrew. It signifies son of. Bartholomew means the son of Ptolemy or Tholomew. The term Bar, like in where Jesus referred to Peter as Simon Bar Jonah. That just means Simon the son of Jonas. So Bartholomew, or Nathaniel as he was also called, he was a native of Cana. He was introduced to Jesus Christ by Philip. We're not told much about Thomas in terms of his background. According to tradition, he was born in Antioch. Matthew was known also as Levi. He is described as the son of Alphaeus. He was a tax collector from Capernaum. We have two other individuals who are referred to as the son of Alphaeus. There's no specific mention that James, the son of Alphaeus, and Judas, not Iscariot, but Judas, also known as Thaddeus or Labius. Labius Thaddeus, he's called in one case, or Judas, not Iscariot. That particular Judas and James, the son of Alphaeus, were brothers, and that is mentioned. Whether there was a third brother in the group, Simon the Zealot, who was also a brother of James, the son of Alphaeus. Now, this particular James and Judas and Simon were the sons of Alphaeus. Their mother was another sister of Mary, the mother of Christ. So those three were also for study. The third of those, Simon the Zealot, as he is called, or Simon Zelotes, or Simon the Canaanite, he's called in one account. The term Canaanite in that context refers to a political faction. It was a nationalist faction, the Zealots, that were out to overthrow the Roman government. Now, note here the people that Christ called. Christ called individuals out of a wide variety of backgrounds. They came out of divergent political backgrounds. Christ's disciples did not remain in those backgrounds. They did not remain involved in politics. Simon didn't keep trying to go out and overthrow the Roman government. Look at, if you want the two extremes, you've got Matthew, who was a Roman tax collector. Now, the Jews really resented Roman occupation. They resented that greatly because as they viewed it, they said, look, God gave this land to us. Who are these pagan Romans coming in here, lording it over us? They really think they're something, but really they're nothing. Because we are the chosen people, and God gave this land to us, and these pagan Romans are coming in here, lording it over us and oppressing us and taking taxes. And they really resented that anyone would do such a thing. So they resented that, and particularly did they despise Jews that worked in cooperation with the Roman government. You would have to compare it to go back, let's say, in American history for a parallel to the time of the Reconstruction after the war between the states. Nobody was hated worse in the South than the group called the Scalawags, who were Southerners that collaborated with the carpetbaggers in order to, they got in collaboration because they could see that was the way to success and money. Their own people hated them because they viewed them as a collaborator. You're a turncoat. You can look at other parallels in other examples of history. That's one that would be perhaps more familiar to us, but you can look at other parallels. Nobody is more unpopular than someone who is viewed as a traitor to his own. You have turned your back on us, your own people, and you are in collaboration with those that we view as the enemy. And so they actually hate them worse than they do the enemy. You know, they kind of say, well, look, I mean, he's the enemy, he's from outside, he came in, you know, we can understand that, but you're a turncoat. Well, that's the way Matthew was viewed. That's kind of, you have to understand how the Jews looked down on what they call the publican. The term publican simply meant someone who held public responsibility, public office, was, an employee of the Roman government, which meant they were, of course, in continual contact with the Romans. They were viewed as a collaborator with the Roman government, plus the fact that many of the tax collectors, most of the tax collectors, were notorious for being crooks. The Romans operated on a principle that the tax collector he was paid on a percentage basis. The more he collected, the more he made, which of course gave incentive to an industrial tax collector to really, Romans wanted to make sure they got theirs, and so they figured the best way is to pay the guy on a percentage basis. That way he'd get a lot for them. The more he got for them, the more he'd get for himself. Which, of course, you can imagine, that did not endure the tax collectors to the people anymore. So you had on that extreme, so you had one such as Matthew. On the other hand, you had Simon the Zealot, who was he was a kind of a revolutionary firebrand type. That's what the Zealots were. They were a kind of an ultra-nationalist movement that was out through the use of everything from guerrilla tactics and techniques and everything else to drive out the Romans, to overthrow the Romans. And they were involved in various methods of political propaganda and an attempt to stir up and to incite a rebellion. They were ready to go to war, to drive out the Romans. So, Jesus' disciples came from both ends and all in the middle. God calls His people out of a variety of backgrounds. Every one of us here, we come from a variety of backgrounds, perhaps even a variety of political backgrounds, some having maybe had no interest whatsoever in politics, others having been maybe very involved on one side or on the other side. God calls us out, and that's just it. We're called out. Christ's disciples did not continue to stay enmeshed in that world system, because Simon had to learn, and Matthew had to learn, and all of them had to learn that there was a kingdom coming. It was the kingdom of God, and it was not going to be set up by some revolutionary overthrow. It was not going to be voted in. It was not going to be this or that. It was going to be established through the power of God. And so Christ called His disciples from a variety of backgrounds, and finally, of course, the final one, Judas Iscariot. And Judas, of course, was the treasurer of the group. He was called, in the book of John, the keeper of the bag. And he was the treasurer. And I just would call that, again, to your attention, that, Judas, well, I think we should look at it this way, that God sometimes allows things that we wonder, why is God allowing this? Sometimes people get upset because they think, well, surely, God wouldn't allow this. Judas was there, right at the top, one of the 12, for 3.5 years. He held a position of responsibility, of trust. He was the keeper of the bag. He was the treasurer. And not only was he the treasurer, he was also a thief. Now, that's not speculation. It says so right there in the book of John. You remember the story when the woman brought the ointment to pour on Christ's feet? And Judas got all upset and he said, "Why was this stuff wasted? You know, this is extravagance, this is waste, it's ridiculous. This stuff should have been taken out and sold, and we could have gotten money for it and given it to the poor. And here you let this woman just waste it, pour it out here on your feet." Boy, he was all upset, thought that was terrible. And undoubtedly some of the others standing around there thought, "Well, yeah, you know, that's a good point. Why wasn't it so? I bet we could have, you know, got a lot of money for that, given it to the poor and help people." John adds in the parenthetical thought, "This he said, not because he cared for the poor, but because he was thief, and he was people's back." That's why he said it. See, sometimes what people say and what their motive for saying it is entirely different. Now, you know, John adds in, you see, when he tells the story in retrospect, he adds in, so you don't think that Judas was just more, he was really this altruistic guy. Oh, he sounded that way. He didn't say, "Give it to me so I can steal it." He said, no, he said, this stuff should have been taken and sold and given to the poor and you could help all these people. He didn't say it because he cared for the poor. He said it because he was the treasurer and he was planning on skimming some off the top. He was a thief. Now, the point I would like to make is, do you think Jesus knew that Judas was up to no good on some of that? Of course he did. I mean, he confronted the woman at the well in Samaria and you know, asked her where her husband was and said, "Oh, well, you know, I'm not married." He said, "Right you are. You know, you've had 5 of them. The one you're living with now, you haven't gotten around to marrying. You know, it's good that you tell the truth. You know, you're definitely not married." And Jesus could look into the hearts of people. He knew and could discern the motives. Of course he knew that Judas was thieving. And you know, the situation dragged on and on and on for a period of time until finally, in God's time, it was dealt with. Now there's an important lesson to learn out of that, and that is the fact that God does not solve problems based on our time schedule. There's nothing you know about that's going to be news to God. There's nothing you found out that's going to be a shock to God. You say, "Man, I wouldn't have known that if you hadn't told me." You know, anything that is going on, even a sparrow that falls to the ground, God knows. So there's nothing that happens that's news to God. God knows. And God does not operate on our time schedule. You see, that's a matter of walking and living by faith. Walking and living by faith. Of trusting God to do what He says He will do when He chooses to do it. And that is a very important lesson that all of us must learn. Now, as we note here in this, we'll pick it up in Luke chapter 6. I'll pick it up in Luke 6 verse 1, Matthew 12:1, and Mark 23, or Mark 2:23 are parallel accounts of the same thing, but Luke's account makes it plain when it happened. The others don't. The others simply refer to a Sabbath in which Jesus was walking through the grain field. But Luke chapter 6 verse 1 makes it plain the second. It occurred on the first Sabbath. He passed along through the grain fields, and his disciples were picking heads of grain, rubbing them with their hands and eating. Now the term, the first Sabbath, forget how it's translated in the King James. I think it's second Sabbath after the first. Is that the way it is? Yeah. The second Sabbath after the first is translated in there, which is a very ambiguous thing. What in the world is that? The more literal translation would be on the first Sabbath. Now what is that? Well, what are the Sabbaths of first rank? Those are the annual holy days. You have the term, a reference to a Sabbath of first rank would be one of the annual Sabbaths, one of the high day Sabbaths, as the Jews termed them. The first Sabbath would be the second annual holy day, which would be the last holy day of unleavened bread. This is the time setting. See, on the second Sabbath, the first rank, which was the second annual holy day of unleavened bread. They were passing through the grain fields, and the disciples were picking heads of grain. Now, they weren't out harvesting. They had spent the night in a house outside of the walled city. And that morning, as they walked back into town, short distance, they walked back into town, because that's the way people normally got around in those days. They didn't hop in their car to go 3 blocks. They walked. And when they walked, it was normally on a footpath, other than some of the main Roman roads that connected the major cities. When you went, it was a path. It was a footpath, because that's all that traveled it, is people going back and forth by foot, and so here it was. This was a little pathway that went from the house where they had stayed into the town, and came, it was a pathway that cut through a grain field. Some of you remember back, before all the highways were fixed up in the way they are now, and all the road grading equipment and paving and everything, to where a lot of times, a lot of houses out in the country were, the connection between them was a small path. It was a bridle path or a footpath, maybe a wagon path, but it was usually fairly narrow. It was just whatever was kept clean by people walking back and forth, or riding an animal, or pulling a wagon back and forth. And of course, if it was grain or something like that, well, it was right up there at the edge of the road. They were walking down the path, and they were reaching out, plucking off some heads of grain, rolling them around in their hands, get the grains off, and eating them. There was nothing illegal about that, and the law in Deuteronomy made specific arrangement for the fact that a stranger, a sojourner, was welcome as they were walking down the road to anything that was out there at roadside. They could pluck it off. That they could not harvest in the sense of going out and gathering things to take somewhere else, but what they ate as they walked along was permissible. And so it was not a problem with that. It was not a matter of stealing. Rather, there was no law of God that was involved. What was involved was one of the traditions of the Pharisees. The rabbis, the commandment says you're not to work on the Sabbath. Well, the rabbis had asked the question, what is work? Now, you don't know what work is. But they wanted to get technical about what is work. So they finally defined 39 different types of work. 39 different categories of work that were prohibited on the Sabbath. And each of those 39 types were subdivided into other groups. So this came under the prohibition against harvesting on the Sabbath. Anything over 3 heads of grain consisted of harvest. Because they had to define, said, well, you shouldn't harvest. All right, how much is harvesting? If they had it figured out that it talks about in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah got after them because they were coming in bearing burdens on the Sabbath. The agricultural produce they were hauling into Jerusalem. And he got after them, that they were not to be bringing in these burdens on the Sabbath. So when the rabbis got through with it, they said, what constitutes a burden? And they finally concluded that anything over the weight of 3 dried pigs consisted of a burden, which you should not bring in. You were transporting agricultural produce. You see, they had to nail it all down. You understand now why so many of the top lawyers are Jewish. They have a proclivity for just, very a detailed, technical-minded approach to things. They have a real proclivity to be technically minded. And they had become so technically minded here that, as lawyers often do, they were straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel. And this is the whole point of it. While they were worried about defining every little thing. Well, you see, it gets back to whether or not we have a heart to obey. Is the question we ask, how close can I get to what God really wants? Or is it, how close can I get to the edge and not get that? You know, how close can I get to the edge and God not strike me with lightning? I mean, I really don't, I don't want to get sent to the lake of fire or anything, but I want to make sure, I don't want to do anything more than what I have to. See, I want to be right on the edge, kind of just dabble my toe over in the cesspool that is this world. Get just as close as I can, but just enough to stay out of trouble. I want somebody to draw a line, and I will get right up with my toe on it. Well, that's not the way God wants us to be. You see, it's a matter of our attitude, of our approach. Are we trying to be as much like God as we can be, or are we trying to see how much we can, quote, get by with without getting into trouble? It's two totally different approaches. Well, the approach that they had taken and that led into all of these lines being drawn is people really didn't have a heart to obey. They didn't want to do anything more than they had to. So the Pharisees said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll draw all these arbitrary lines and we'll really rope them in. We will attach so many do's and don'ts that they won't even be able to get close to breaking the law. Because they'll have to get out, we hedge them about. It reflects an attitude. Jesus said in Matthew 12 and verse 7, He said, if you would have known and understood what this means, I desire mercy and compassion and not sacrifice, then you would not have condemned the guiltless. Not the guilty, but the guiltless. He said, if you had understood the principle of the spirit of the law, if you'd understood what God meant when He said, I want mercy and not sacrifice, I'm more concerned with an inward attitude that is displayed by outward action than I am by somebody who simply goes through the motions of outward ritual conformity. There is a contrast. There is a play on the symbolism. Jesus utilized that time period and emphasized a part of the spiritual lesson. Now, we find that a little later he was in a synagogue and was teaching, and notice why they watched him to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. Luke 6:7 says that the scribes and the Pharisees were carefully watching him to see whether or not he would heal on the Sabbath, so that they might find an accusation and complaint against him. They were doing it so they could have an accusation. They were looking for a chance to accuse. They were not concerned about helping someone. Jesus pointed out the example of them. It's recorded in Matthew 12, the parallel account, that he said, if you had a sheep and the sheep fell in the pit on the Sabbath, wouldn't you take hold of it and pull it out? Well, how much better is a man than a sheep? You've got a sheep that's stuck in the pit, and pull him out. Here this man has his right hand all withered and crippled, and appointed 12, that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach, and to have authority and power to heal diseases and to cast out demons. And Simon Peter is always mentioned first. He was the leader of the 12. He is in every listing that you ever find of the 12, Simon Peter's name is always listed first. From of them, we've already gone through that. And then we find here that Christ went about selecting them. He went out to a private place. He prayed all night. He was facing a momentous decision. Luke 6:12, it mentions that he prayed all night, spent all night in prayer to God concerning the selection of these 12, going over each one of them and talking about it and discussing it with the Father to make that very important decision. He ordained them as apostles. He sent them out to preach. He gave them authority to heal and to cast out demons. Now, as we come on in Luke chapter 7, Luke follows more of a direct chronological account. Luke's account is more directly chronological. Matthew tends to be topical. He deals with topics or subjects and lumps things together with only the very most general regard for chronology. He's writing from a different standpoint. So, Luke brings out that there was a centurion, a Roman soldier, who had a servant who was sick and about to die. Now, this Roman soldier was very concerned about his servant. He was a man that had come to, let's say, have a certain regard of the Jews. He had knowledge of the Jewish religion. It was what the Jews sometimes termed a proselyte of the gate. In other words, he was not fully converted to Judaism, but he was one who would frequent the synagogue and who sought to learn of these things. Well, anyway, he heard about Jesus, and he sent some elders of the Jews and asked Jesus to come to heal his servant. And these elders came to Jesus, and they said, "Look, this man is a very deserving man. He loves our nation. He's been very favorable to us. He built a synagogue for us. We wish you would come and do what he asked." Jesus went with him, and when he was fairly close to the house, the centurion sent friends to him, reading it from Luke 7, verse 6, saying to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, because I'm not worthy that you should even come under my roof. Neither did I consider that I was worthy myself to come to you. But just give the command, and my servant shall be healed. Because I am a man under authority. And I have soldiers under me. And I tell this one, go, and he goes, and another one, come, and he comes. I tell my servant, do this, and he does it. I understand how authority works." He said, "I don't deserve for you to come into my house. I don't feel worthy to even come up and talk to you face to face. And I certainly don't deserve to have you come into my house. I don't feel like I deserve the honor that you would bestow in doing that. But, I don't need that because I understand authority. And you don't have to come over here because I know you have authority. And all you've got to do is give the word, because I may not understand a lot of things, but one thing I understand authority. I'm a Roman soldier, and I know how authority works. If you've got authority, you say it, and it's done." They didn't put things to a vote in the Roman army. That was authority absolute. When they said go, you went. There was no question about it. You didn't want to know why you were supposed to go. You took off. So this soldier, this Roman centurion, said, "Look, I understand authority. And I know you have authority, so, really all that's needed is you just give the word, and my servant's going to be healed. I know that. Because I know you have authority, and I understand all about authority. I know how authority works." When Jesus heard it, he marveled. He said, I have never met an Israelite that has this kind of faith. Here this Roman soldier has an understanding of faith that puts to shame all the rest of you. He told his disciples and those that were there. He said, this Roman soldier, he understands what faith is all about. He grasped that. He marveled. He said, I have not found such faith, no, not in Israel. There is an important lesson to learn here. A lesson of what faith is all about. You see, faith really gets back to the confidence that God can and will do what He says He will do. The centurion had confidence. He said, look, it's simply a matter of authority, and I know how authority works. You've got the authority, and so you give the word and it's done. I'm not worried about it. So often, we get our eyes on the around, and we lose sight of the power of God. We live in an age in which we're so surrounded with all of the things that man can do, all of the glitter and glamour of man's technology. We're so surrounded with what man can do, that we lose sight of what God can do. Well, Jesus made the observation in one place. He said, when the Son of Man returns, shall He find faith on the earth? Giving the indication that He wouldn't find very much. I think we have to understand, we have to realize we live in a faithless age. Maybe part of it is we, of all ages that don't understand authority, ours is probably the chief. There is a correlation between the understanding of authority and faith. Nobody understood it better than this Roman soldier. We perhaps live in an age that has less faith, as well as an age that understands authority less than any other age. Shouldn't surprise us that maybe there's a little bit of correlation here. Christ pointed this out, and this example is set down in the Bible to give us some insight as to what authority is, or what faith is all about. Christ went on in Matthew 8 and verse 10, told some of the Pharisees around them, as He was talking here to the centurion, He said, I've not found so great a faith in Israel. In verse 11 of Matthew 8, I say to you that many shall come from east and west and shall sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, and the children of the kingdom are going to find themselves thrown into outer darkness. He looked around and he said, you fellows, you think you've got it made. You think you have it made. Let me tell you something. You see that example over there, that Roman centurion? Understand something. They're going, when the kingdom comes, you're going to find that there are those from east and west and north and south, from all over the world. You're going to find people of every background who come and sit down with Abraham in the kingdom. Because they're the children of faith, like this Roman centurion. You're going to find people of every background, people from all over who are going to be there with Abraham, and some of you who think you have it made because of your physical origin, you're going to find yourself on the outside looking in. Because God looks on the heart. God looks on what we are, not simply on what we have or whatever the external trappings are. God looks on the heart. And that is very important. Well, let's note as we go on through as we followed the account on through in Mark 3 and the parallel in Matthew 12, where they had accused Christ of casting out demons by Beelzebub, and He showed the ridiculous, what a ridiculous statement that was. But then, as we note down here in Matthew 12:30, He said, anyone who is not with me is against me. Anyone who doesn't gather with me scatters. Christ had been talking here beginning in Matthew 12:25 that a kingdom divided against itself is brought to ruin. This should certainly show that Christ is not seeking to work through two or more competing organizations. God is not the author of confusion. 1 Corinthians 14:33. Jesus said every kingdom divided against itself is going to fall. But the kingdom of God is not going to fall. God is not working through various competing, differing, bickering organizations. He simply doesn't do that. A kingdom divided against itself is going to fall. Jesus said, if you're not with me, you're against me. If you don't gather with me, then you scatter. So, again, an important lesson, insight, to help us realize that God is not divided in some such way as that. Christ then went on to discuss the subject of the unpardonable sin as He warned the Pharisees. I'm not going to go into great detail on that. If you have questions on it, you might read Mr. Armstrong's booklet on what do you mean the unpardonable sin. It goes into a detailed explanation. Let me just summarize it to say that the sin is unpardonable because it is not repented of. It involves a willful hardening of the heart and mind against the workings of God's Holy Spirit. That's why it's called blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. Because the Spirit is the agency by which God works with our mind. And when a person becomes so hardened against God's Spirit that there is simply no longer a means to bring them to repentance. And at that point, they are in a situation. He warned the Pharisees because you see, they knew better than what they were saying. They were very upset and they were accusing Him of things out of jealousy and out of resentment. And He knew that they knew better. And He told them, He said, look, you are hardening your heart and mind. You had better be careful. He mentions in Matthew 12:32 concerning this unpardonable sin that it will not be forgiven him neither in this age nor in the age to come. Now that shows, that singles this sin out, you see. It says it won't be forgiven now or in the future. That shows, of course, that some sins will be forgiven in the age to come. Some sins will be forgiven in the age to come. The Catholic Church takes that verse and uses it as one of the ones that they use to support purgatory. The idea, you see, that you can pay your way out in the world to come which is taken out of context. They put it together with another couple of verses which are also taken out of context and used to support the concept of prayers for the dead. The concept of purgatory means you come out of that background. They should be aware of the 2 or 3 verses that they use to support that doctrine. And this, of course, it's not talking about that you can say so many masses for someone and somehow help them work their way out. Because the key to being forgiven is repentance. The individual must repent. It talks about in the world to come or in the age to come, not simply that you go on living after you're dead, because the dead know not anything. You don't know anything until you're resurrected, until you're brought back to life. But it does show, you see, that the Protestant world, which says that, well, boy, you die and that's it, your fate is sealed. Well, they're not right either. This verse certainly shows that there will be sins forgiven. In fact, everything except this one that will be forgiven or can be forgiven in the age to come, in the time of the resurrection. That is, as we understand it, the white throne judgment period. Now, Christ then went on to give a sign to the Pharisees. In Matthew 12:39, he says, "A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. No sign shall be given to it except the sign of Jonah the prophet." In the same way as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish 3 days and 3 nights, that's how the Son of Man is going to be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. And the men of Nineveh will stand in the judgment with this generation and condemn it. The queen of the south will stand in the judgment with this generation and condemn it. See, that is the age to come. It is the time of judgment when the men of Nineveh and the queen of the south are going to be resurrected. Same time when that generation with whom Christ dealt was going to be resurrected. So that's the context, you see. But notice this sign. He said, no sign except the sign of the prophet Jonah. 3 days and 3 nights. Do you know why that sign was uniquely a sign to the Pharisees and the religious leaders? In a very special way, that was the sign of Christ's Messiahship to them. Now think about it. You remember when Jesus was crucified and the disciples took the body, or Joseph of Arimathea got the body and took it and quickly buried it before the sun set. The Pharisees and some of the chief priests went to Herod, or to Pilate, and they said, "We have a request to make." This deceiver, while he was alive, said that he would rise from the dead. Now, what we are afraid of is that his disciples are going to come and steal the body and then claim he is raised from the dead. And then the latter condition of things is going to be worse than the beginning. We're really going to have a mess on our hands then. So what we need to do at all costs is to prevent that from happening. What we request of you, Pilate, is that you will give us a detachment of troops, and we will set a guard on the tomb, and we will seal the rock, and nobody is going to be able to get in and steal that body. We will guarantee that. We'll have these soldiers there. Pilate said, "Fine, take it." So they ensured that nobody broke in and stole the body. And nobody did. But the body was still gone. You see, they had the witness of their own soldiers they had placed there to guard the tomb. The soldiers told them, said, "Hey, this earthquake occurred and the rock rolled back. He's been resurrected. He's gone. Nobody came and stole the body." And the Pharisees, you remember what they told them? It's recorded. Matthew recorded. They said, "Look, now don't you tell anybody. You tell people that you went to sleep. And while you were asleep, the disciples came and stole the body. And if Pilate hears it and you get in trouble, we'll take care of it and make sure that nothing happens to you." And so then that story went abroad. Now, if you work up a lie with someone to tell, you know, other people may hear it and they may not know whether it's true or not, but there's two people that know it's a lie. You and the guy you bribed to tell it. See, you know. They bribed the soldiers to tell the lie. When you bribe somebody to tell a lie, two of you know it's a lie, you and him. So Christ being in the grave 3 days and 3 nights was a witness it was a sign to them in a unique way. Because they had the witness of their own soldiers who were there to testify he came out the same time he said he would. And so it was in a very direct sense a sign to them. We continue on in Matthew 11 and verse 2. John was in prison. He heard about the works of Christ. He sent 2 of his disciples. They asked him, "Are you the one that should come, or should we look for another?" Now, understand, you see, John had known and acknowledged Christ to be the Messiah, but he had not fully understood all the Old Testament prophecies. all of a sudden something happened that he hadn't anticipated. He was put in jail and looked like he was going to be executed. And Jesus hadn't done anything. The kingdom was not restored, and nothing was being done to stop it. And John began to wonder if perhaps there was something, and even more likely, his disciples were wondering, something, maybe we've misunderstood something. So he told them, he said, "Will you go ask him? Is he the Messiah? Is he the one that everything points to? Or is he simply another forerunner? Is there someone coming after him?" Jesus then simply pointed to the works that he was doing. Told him, he says, "You go and tell John what you saw and what you heard." And in that sense, strengthened and encouraged John in that final trial that he suffered, that he went through. Then Jesus began to talk about John and what the role that he served. And he said in Matthew 11 and verse 12, "From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven is taken by violence, and the violent seize it. Because the law and all the prophets prophesied until John. And if you're willing to receive it, he is Elijah who was prophesied to come. Anyone who has ears to hear, let him hear." Now, there's an interesting comment on these verses in the Adam Clark commentary. It says, "The tax gatherers and heathen, whom the scribes and Pharisees think have no right to the kingdom of God, filled with zeal and earnestness, seize at once on the proffered mercy of the gospel, and so take the kingdom as by force from those learned doctors who claim for themselves the chiefest places in that kingdom. And earnestness of violent intensity is necessary to make it into the kingdom." That's the point, that it takes an earnestness. You have got to thrust in, to really, to mean it, to go after it with everything in you. Then he says that the law and the prophets prophesied until John. Prior to John the Baptist, only the Old Testament message was proclaimed. Since that time, the gospel of the kingdom was preached, and the opportunity to be a part of the kingdom was now extended. It began to be extended when John began to preach and proclaim repentance. He was the one who came in fulfillment of the prophecy in Malachi in the spirit and power of Elijah prior to the first coming of Christ. Are the intellectuals the ones that find it easiest to understand God's plan and purpose? Not at all. In Matthew 11 and verse 25, Jesus said, "I praise you and fully agree with you, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you've hidden these things from the self-esteemed intellectuals and prudent ones and have revealed them unto babes." Now, in other words, those who viewed themselves as the educated, the elite, who looked down on everyone else, really did not understand the truth. Some people think, the scholars, they're the ones. You have to look for the scholars. You have to look for the scholars. Well, if all it took was scholarship to understand the truth, why didn't the scribes and Pharisees understand? If all you need to understand the truth is to be able to read Greek and Hebrew, Greece is full of people that speak Greek, and they read it too. If they read the New Testament, they read it in Greek. It's all Greek to them because that's what they speak. Greece is filled with people that speak Greek. How many of them understand the truth? How many of them keep the Sabbath? How many of them are converted? Scribes and Pharisees spoke Hebrew. They read Hebrew. When they studied the Old Testament scriptures, they studied it in the original Hebrew. How many of them understood what it was talking about? The point that I make is it takes a lot more than simply knowing the Greek and the Hebrew to understand the Scripture. If it did, then why haven't all the scholars been the ones that are converted? In fact, if you want to read some of the craziest, most crackpot, asinine, idiot theories in the world, look up some of the great scholarly writings on the subject of the Bible. You'll find every crackpot idea that has ever occurred to the mind of man. They look back in the book of Genesis or in the first 5 books of the Bible, and they find that some verses use the name Yahweh, and some use the name Elohim, and some contain certain priestly certain verses give instructions to the priests. And in the book of Deuteronomy, it goes back and restates a lot of the things that had been stated earlier, to the final generation. And instead of being able to understand what that's all about, they came to the conclusion, well, Moses must not have written that. That must have been written by 5 different people. They come up with all these crazy ideas. They don't understand. And Christ simply said, look, Father, I thank you that you've hidden these things from the wise and prudent ones. In other words, the ones that think they're wise and prudent, the self-esteemed intellectuals, those who really think they know it all. You've hidden it from them. You've revealed it to babes. You've revealed the truth to people they look down on. They look down on people like you and me. See, what do these guys know? Well, we're the great scholars. We know it all. Well, in a few years they're going to find out how much they know. And, all the arguments about the Greek and the Hebrew are going to be moot. Because Christ is going to come back in power and in glory, and the argument is going to be settled. And none of them are going to be standing there wanting to argue about the Greek about that time. So, it's a matter of understanding that understanding the truth is something that comes because God's Spirit is working with you. And it says in Psalm 111, verse 10, a good understanding have all they that do your commandments. The key to understanding is you're willing to obey God. You have a humble, teachable attitude, a childlike spirit. Part of the problem with the intellectuals is they get so bent out of shape trying to reason themselves astray. A child takes things literally. Most of us are parents who've had children. A little bitty kid, you tell them something, they take it literally. And sometimes they can come out with some statements that just embarrass the fire out of you at inappropriate times. Just a very simple, childlike approach. Little kid, they take it literally, you say it, and they believe it. Christ said that those who are going to understand the truth are those that have that simple, childlike approach. They take it literally. God says it, they believe it. God makes a promise, they believe that. Just simple-minded enough that if God says that's what it is, well then we say, that's what it is. God makes a promise, we believe it, and we reach out and we claim it. And then there are those that, reason around and reason astray and get all bogged down in all these things. But, so we never want to lose that childlike simplicity. When God makes a promise, when God tells us that He is our, whatever He is, our sustainer, our healer, our creator, our ruler, our master, our Lord, we want to believe those things and simply take Him at His word and have that simple childlike approach, that childlike teachability, that very simple approach. Well, let's summarize here. John 5. We note that this was a feast of the Jews. This was the fall festival season. John 5, verse 1. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. And in John 5:19, Jesus said, "Truly the Son is able to do nothing by Himself except it is something He sees the Father doing, because whatever the Father does, these same things the Son does in exactly the same way." Jesus did not come to do away with His Father's law. He did not come doing His own thing. John 5:19 makes plain that Jesus Christ followed the Father completely and totally. In terms of judgment, is the Father the one that's going to judge us? In John 5 verse 22, Jesus said, "The Father judges no one. He's given responsibility of all judgment to the Son." Verse 27 of John 5 says He's given Him authority and power to execute judgment because He is the Son of Man. The authority to make judgment, the authority to judge, was delegated to Jesus Christ. He's the one that came and lived life as a human being, and God committed judgment to Him as the one responsible for that judgment. That is the role. You know, in Matthew 19:28 makes plain that we can share in that role of judgment. You know, it talks about the 12 apostles sitting on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So that judgment is assigned out by God to Christ and those who will rule and reign under Christ. John 5:45, let's note. He says, "Do you think that I will accuse you before the Father? There's one who's accusing you already, Moses, in whom you claim to trust and have hope." In other words, that generation claimed, they paid lip service to a recognition of Moses as God's prophet. They stood as guilty because they weren't doing and believing the very things taught by Moses, whom they claimed to teach or to follow and believe in everything. Christ said, "I don't have to accuse you. Moses accuses you." Moses being the first 5 books written by Moses. He said, "Moses accuses you." You know, Moses has left a written record. You pay lip service. You acknowledge it to be the Word of God, and you don't do it. So you stand accused by the very one that you acknowledge as being God's prophet. You don't acknowledge me, you acknowledge Moses. Fine. You know, that Moses accuses you, I don't. Because you're not doing what Moses said. You're not believing the prophecies he gave. You're not keeping the laws he gave. Notice here that the whole setting in John 5 is the setting of the fall festival season, the time of judgment, of God's judgment, the time when those in the graves will come forth. Don't be amazed at this, because the time is coming in which all that are in the graves shall hear His voice, and they'll come out of the graves. The whole setting here of Matthew 5, or of John 5 is the fall festival season, the time of the Feast of Trumpets. Now, as we come on down, in Luke 8 makes plain, verse 1, that He was going through making a tour, city by city, village by village, preaching and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom of God. He was going through every place, step by step. And we find beginning to get into many of the parables that are recorded. Matthew 13 records parables. He began to teach the parables. The sower and the seed is the one that he's teaching here. And note that why he taught in parables. Matthew 13 verse 10. The disciples asked Him, "Why do you speak in parables?" And He said, "Because it's given unto you to know and understand the mysteries of the kingdom, but to them it's not given." They hear it, but they don't understand it. Verse 15, because the heart of this people has grown corrupt. They don't understand, they don't get it, they don't really have a heart to obey, and so it's just simply not being made clear to them. The parables serve 2 purposes. They obscured the truth from those with whom God was not working, but once you have the key to the parable, it makes the truth more plain. The parables make the truth more understandable to us because we have the key. Notice, Matthew 13:18. Now, hear the parable of the sower. Then Jesus begins to go through in Matthew 13:18 and explain the parable he had told them earlier in Matthew 13. See, it's an illustration that those with whom God is not working, those who don't have the keys, don't understand it. They hear it and it just goes in and out. If God is working with you and is opening your mind and calling you, you have the keys to understanding, it made the truth more plain, more understandable to those with whom God was really working. The parable of the sower is explained here, Matthew 13:18 through 23. It shows basically the different categories of people that hear the gospel. The word goes out. A lot of it falls by the wayside. Millions of people come in contact with the telecast or the plain truth or however it reaches them, and it goes in one ear and out the other. It never takes root. That's the seed that fell by the wayside and the birds gather it up. Then there's that which takes root in rocky, stony ground. Then there's that which falls, in the thorns and the thistles, and then there's finally that which falls in good ground and bears good fruit. The last three categories would be the ones that we would be concerned about, because if you're here, then obviously the Word took some root. Now, notice the three categories. See, Christ explains it. He said, the one that fell on the stony ground, that's the ones that hear the truth. They hear the Word, and with joy they receive it. They get all excited. It's all emotion. But they have no depth of root in themselves. And by, when persecution because of the Word arises, they wither. They have no root in themselves. You see, you have the stony ground, the hard ground, that the problem there is a lack of root structure. The root system is what gives staying power to the plant. Here are people that are shallow. It's all on the surface. It's all emotion. They emotionally respond very quickly, but they've not really proven anything. They don't really know it and know that they know it. They've not deeply proven it to themselves, and so the result is that when things happen and problems arise and difficulties come, they wither away. They don't have staying power because they're not deeply anchored and rooted in the truth. Their roots are shallow. It's spur of the moment. It's emotion. And it doesn't have staying power. Well, that's the first pitfall. The two pitfalls Christ warned. That's one. Is not being deeply enough rooted in the truth. Being too shallow. The other is where it falls in the ground and the thorns and the thistles come up and they gradually choke it out. And Christ said here in Matthew 13:22 that is the cares of this life that gradually come in and choke it out and prevent it from being fruitful. See what happens? Other things get in the way. Other things competing for time and attention and resources. You plant a garden, we've all had to fight the battle of the weeds and all the things that come up. You ever had tomatoes come up and choke out all your weeds? Somehow or another it never works that way. If something is of value, you have to tend it. It takes work. You don't have to plant your weeds and water them and I never had trouble getting weeds to grow. They just grow. Just leave it alone. Don't do anything. They'll grow. And if you leave it alone, they'll choke out everything else. See, the point is that the cares of this life will crowd in. And we only have so much time, so much attention, so much resources. And these things crowd in and they compete. And they choke it out. And finally, the plant never really bears any fruit. The final category is it's in good ground that brings forth fruit. Some more, some less. But it's fruit. So Christ warned us. He says if the Word takes root, two things you've got to be concerned about is it's better take deep root. Not be shallow and on the surface, but deep root. Where you can stick through the hard times, the tough times. And you better keep your garden weeds. Because if you don't, the cares of this life will come in and they'll choke it. So a very important parable Christ gave. So Christ showed right here in Matthew 13:17 that we can have a more clear understanding of things that the prophets only vaguely comprehended. He says, of a truth, I am telling you, many prophets and righteous men have desired to see what you're seeing, but did not see it, and to hear what you're hearing, but did not hear it. God has revealed, we have the opportunity to understand things that the patriarchs of old
more clearly explained and understood. So, it's just plain. I mean, you can even go to the book of Daniel. Daniel didn't understand any of his own prophecies. These things were sealed up, shut up until the time of the end. Christ made plain. He explained things in detail. But did not see it, and to hear what you're hearing, but did not hear it. God has revealed, we have the opportunity to understand things that the patriarchs of old didn't. More clearly explained and understood. So, it's just plain. I mean, you can even go to the book of Daniel. Daniel didn't understand many of his own prophecies. These things were sealed up, shut up until the time of the end. Christ made plain. He explained things in detail that many of the prophets and righteous men of the past had only dimly seen. There's an awful lot that is packed in to what Jesus taught and preached. I can get some help in passing these out. Here in this series, we come here to these parables, and we're going to be spending a pretty good bit of time over the next couple of Bible studies and going in to the details of many of these things that Jesus taught and said. Many of the details of these messages are recorded. This period this evening basically brought us up until the fall festival period, from the Feast of Unleavened Bread of 29, the fall festival period of 29. We will next time pick up the story where we left off, which would be in the late fall of 29, following the festivals, up until the time just before the Passover of 30. And which will bring us up to the final year of Christ's ministry. One of the things we note as we go through, that the further Christ's ministry progresses, the more details are given, and the more we have details of what he said, and taught. So you have the particular areas the chapters we're going to be covering next time, listed here that can help you to go through, read it, review it in detail. If you have any questions or anything that you wish to send up, well, we will try to address them at that time. And from these questions from the booklet, Who was Jesus? We're told the rest, this is a quote from the booklet, but the rest of the world, not called to understand, didn't grab a hold of this opportunity to seek and learn about God's way. In time Melchizedek chose to depart from the city of peace, there arose a famine of the truth of God on earth. Was Christ here on earth teaching? Not in the sense that he did in his earthly ministry, but we're shown in Genesis 14 that he did function as a priest of God, as Melchizedek, the priest of the Most High God. He functioned as a priest during that time for those with whom God was working. The city of Jerusalem was recognized, even the pagans around knew it to be the city, the holy city. It was viewed in that way. Later on, you find a Canaanite king who had taken the title Adonai-Zedek, which meant the Lord of righteousness, and was the king there of Jerusalem. That was the title that was taken. So they recognized something, but in terms, was he teaching there in the same way? No, it was not a public ministry in that way. Let's just 8:26. I have many things to say and to judge of you, but he that sent me is true, and I speak to the world of those things which I have heard of him. They understood not that he spoke to them of the Father. The time setting is the period of the last great day. We will get into that in a future Bible study. This is Christ teaching on the last great day, that where he was, in effect, testifying of judgment and explaining judgment to them. see. Maybe I read the wrong one. Oh, okay. Okay, I read the wrong, it was John 8:56 instead of 26. Okay. That makes more sense. John 8:56. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. In faith, Abraham perceived that the Messiah was going to come. Abraham looked forward to the coming of the Messiah. He lived in faith that the Messiah would come. We live in faith that the Messiah did come and will come again. Abraham lived in faith that he would come. And he, in faith, looked down and saw that time and anticipated it. John 5, verse 4. The angel went down at a certain season into the pool, troubled the water. Whosoever then first, after the troubling of the water, stepped in, was made whole of whatever disease he